The number one team in the nation dominated against their rival Georgia Tech. OSU, Ohio State University, for you that don't know, got embarrassed against the Blake Corumless Wolverines at home. Rivalry week and much more happened yesterday, and this is what will be talked about on today's episode of Austin's Academy of Sports. Trust me, we will get to the Ohio State-Michigan game soon, but I want to start with the number one team in the nation, my number one team in the nation, the Georgia Bulldogs. Let them dogs eat. Georgia Tech, by far, had the better quarterback play, I should say, with a quarterback that's not really talked about with Georgia Tech's record throughout the years. He is a sophomore, I believe. He might even be a junior, actually. But, so he's an upperclassman. He's not really talked about that much. But, Georgia's QB, Stetson Bennett, after winning the championship last year, has been talked about ever since he won the championship. He's been talked about how he's a mailman, and he came from a mailman to college football. Great guy, carried his team, but he didn't have the best game yesterday. I don't remember his stats, but by far Georgia Tech had the better quarterback play in that game. Kenny McIntosh, the Dogs running back, had 12 carries for 86 yards and one touchdown. Basically, Georgia won in the trenches, but Georgia Tech won in the QB play. But it didn't matter because the trenches win over QB play, and Georgia got the win in dominating fashion, as I mentioned earlier. So Georgia improves to 12-0, first back-to-back 12-win season in program history, I believe, going 12-0. And they're setting up a match with the gritty LSU team. Champ Week, that's going to be a good match. I believe Georgia gets the win there in Atlanta. Mercedes-Benz Stadium should be a good game, but I think Georgia wins that game coming off of a dominant win against Georgia Tech in the rivalry game and a dominant season. So I got Georgia winning, actually, their championship, and I got Georgia winning the whole thing, the national championship as well. But next, the Oregon State Beavers knocked out the Oregon Ducks in Corvallis in Oregon State. Bo Nix had another Heisman game with 327 yards throwing and 2 touchdowns in the air in a losing effort, which will most likely lose him the Heisman. Bo Nix transferred over from Auburn. Auburn's not very good this year. Looking for a new coach next year. And, he transferred over to Oregon, one of those powerhouse Pac-12 schools, and he dominated pretty much. He didn't have the best wide receiver core, but he made it work with his throwing arms. He's talented as they come. I don't know if he'll transfer to the NFL this year or give it another year to kind of regret or progress through the Oregon Ducks system. It'll be a shocker if he transfers out of the Ducks system, but I think he'll stay, and he'll be a solid QB1 for any NFL team that wants them. But speaking of Heisman, well, actually, let's get back to this Oregon State game. With 8 minutes and 11 seconds left, the Oregon State Beavers running back Isaiah Newell sealed the game with a 6-yard touchdown run, putting the score 38-34. Oregon Ducks couldn't come back from that, and Oregon State got the rivalry win in Corvallis. So speaking of Heisman, I still have Caleb Williams, the gunslinger, winning it with his great performance last night against Notre Dame. Caleb went off. He had like 2 rushing touchdowns and 3 passing touchdowns. It was a great game. He had a lot of yards, close to 300, and he's been consistent with yards throughout the whole season. He's had like 300 yards throughout the whole season, every game. Now, the end of the season is where his Heisman's hopes went up because of the ranked opponents he played. They did win or lose a 1-point game against the Pac-12 opponent, Utah, earlier in the season. I think it was like week 8 or 9 or maybe even 7. They did win or lose on the road to Utah, and that was a great game. Knockout punch between the 2 powerhouse Pac-12 schools besides Oregon. And they did lose, but I still think Caleb Williams gets it done because of C.J. Stroud's performance against Michigan. C.J. Stroud still might win the Heisman, which I will talk about a little later in the show. But right now, my Heisman, if I was on the college football Heisman voting, I would pick Caleb Williams to win because of his performances, his consistent performances, and his receiving core, his running back, his offensive line. They're good, but he's the one who slings it around and gets the yards and gets the votes. So finally, the game of the weekend, I think, in my minds, in most people's minds, was in the shoe, Ohio State, Michigan. I predicted Ohio State winning, and I am sorry, Michigan fans, but I predicted Ohio State to win, and I'm sorry. Michigan's got my utmost respect now. With Jim Harbaugh going 2 games in a row against Ohio State, one at home in the snowy weather and one in the shoe. But it was a great game, winning 45-23. Jim Harbaugh outsmarted Ryan Day on all ends of the ball, special teams, offense, defense. Ever since he took John Harbaugh, his older brother's defensive possessions away, or his defensive scheme of mind, he likes to play defense. He likes the defensive end of the ball. He's gotten a lot of respect now just from this weekend, winning against Ohio State at the shoe, and he's gained a lot of respect from recruits, as he already flipped one recruit, 5-star recruit last night, which was slated to go to Ohio. He recruited, I think it was a 5-star linebacker, which is defense again, and great guy. He's got a lot to prove, and he's going to be at Michigan for a long time coming. And like I said, the recruits, they're going to be going from Ohio State to Michigan. It's going to be a madhouse. Michigan will be the big powerhouse of the Big Ten for a few more years to come, and nothing I can say as a Michigan State fan. So, anyways, Donovan Edwards was the X factor when Blake Corum left with an injury. He ran for 216 yards and 2 touchdowns in the clutch end of the game. The Ohio State's defense looked like Michigan State's defense. They couldn't stop him. It was a bad outing for the defense. Jim Knowles, who they hired as the defensive coordinator for that game specifically, did not work out. So hopefully they make some adjustments, and I'll save that for the end of the podcast. But C.J. Stroud had an overall good game with 349 yards in the air, but his 2 picks kind of sealed the game as well. Michigan got those 2 picks and then took advantage of it. And then C.J. Stroud also didn't convert in the red zone for some reason. I don't know if it was the play calling or what it was, but in order to beat a juggernaut like Michigan, you gotta convert your touchdowns in the red zone, wouldn't you think? I mean, he didn't do that, and it cost him the game. But in the end, he still has a chance for a Heisman because he has a heavy favorite coming in. He's had consistent games, throwing the ball, running the ball. He's had his best wide receiver out pretty much the whole year, Smith-Njigba. And but their wide receiver core, I think Ohio State is wide receiver university. Hot take there, but anyways, he still probably has a favorite, him and Caleb Williams right now. Blake Corum's probably ran himself out of the Heisman count because of his injury, so nowhere his fault. But if Kenneth Walker can't win Heisman, Blake Corum can't win Heisman. He can't win them all. He's still on a great team, getting some good reps, but I still think Caleb Williams wins the Heisman. So some important champ games for this weekend are LSU at Georgia, Clemson at North Carolina, and then Purdue at Michigan. So far, my final college football playoff rankings. Let's start with number 1 through 4. 1, Georgia, just because of their dominant win over Michigan last year. And if the college football playoff rankings has any sense, they will put Georgia at number 1 because Michigan should be number 2 over their win at Ohio State, and Georgia beat Michigan, has the head-to-head rankings last year. So if Michigan fans want number 1, they'd have to go through Georgia, and I don't think they can do that. Actually, this year I think they could beat them, but they haven't played them yet, so we'll see. So 2, Michigan. 3, TCU. They're undefeated season. They got to be up there. And then 4, I had a toss-up between USC and Ohio State. I'm going with USC. They have a stronger strength of schedule than Ohio State. Their end of schedule was great. They only lost one game to Utah on the road. Ohio State lost one game at home. I'm sure that'll factor in for the college football playoff rankings. So I'll put 5 at Ohio State and then 6 LSU. LSU had a disappointing loss, so they might even move back a few, but right now it's 1 through 5 are pretty much locked. And then this is all barring they win their championship games, of course, but I think they will. So once again, number 1, Georgia, number 2, Michigan, number 3, TCU, number 4, USC, number 5, Ohio State. As always, let me know what you think in the comments. Have a great week, and go green. Austin signing off.